Hello and welcome back to another development vlog for Space Game, my deck building, resource management and dice game. In this video I want to talk about the dice in Space Game and how it took me nearly 3 months to figure out what was wrong with them. So the purpose of dice in Space Game is to gain resources, similar to how you would do it in Wingspan. Initially you would go to a planet, roll 2 dice, or 1 if the planet has been landed on a bunch of times that round, and you would gain the resources you rolled. Each set of dice was unique to each planet, and that's a very important detail because that specific design choice was made to evoke feelings and player actions. What I mean by that is I wanted each planet to have unique dice and therefore unique resources and chances of rolling those resources, because I wanted that to have an effect on a player's choice to go to a particular planet. Now there are 2 immediate mechanics affecting that choice. The dice, as I've said, and the route cards as well, which are essentially telling the player which planets to go to get points. However, the latter mechanic was so potent and so strong in comparison to the dice that it was an extreme rarity for players to go to a planet just to gain particular resources, and not just because their route card said so. This was doubly difficult to get the player to do once I introduced the Ticket to Ride-esque mechanic in which you get minus points if you fail to complete route cards, because then there was also a negative avoidance as well. My first attempt to remedy this was by making resources more scarce. I wanted the players to feel the need to gain resources, so I just took them away, or at least most of them anyway. On top of that, I made each planet way more specialized. This means that fuel was only available on Venus and Saturn, metal was only available on Mercury and Uranus, and extra route cards were only available on Jupiter. However, this didn't fix anything. If anything, it just made players more frustrated because they had to complete these route cards, but now they felt it was impossible to do so due to the lack of resources such as fuel. Another strategy was to give planets points, and if you went to particular planets you would gain extra victory points to try and sweeten the deal, if anything, just to get players more excited to go to these planets. However, this just made it more cumbersome to carry out your turn, as there was an additional thing you had to think about and do after your turn was over. And this actually brings me onto the catalyst for the biggest change to the dice that finally made that big difference to engagement. Now, one major issue I was having with the game as a whole was that the game felt like it was taking forever. Despite the runtime only being 45 to 60 minutes, it kinda felt like 2 to 3 hours sometimes. At this point, I really had to take a step back and think why. I even got my playtesters to play Wingspan after playing Space Game, as I knew Wingspan would take longer to play. And after we played, I wanted them to tell me which game felt longer. There was a unanimous opinion that Wingspan took less time, despite us playing for an extra half an hour. So I asked myself again, why? Well, the answer was this, and it's probably the same for every game where turns aren't carried out simultaneously. The turns took way too long. It took each player around a minute to carry out their turn on average during Space Game. In a 4-player game, you are looking at 3 to 4 minutes in between your turns, which is nightmarishly long, especially in a game like this with a lower amount of player interaction. So again, I looked back at Wingspan, and I really looked this time, and I realised that each turn, almost regardless of what players were doing, took around 30 seconds at maximum, and even then most turns, especially early on, took about 5 to 10 seconds, even when the food dice were involved. And that was when the light bulb lit above my head. It was the dice. The core difference between Wingspan and Space Game was with Wingspan, dice are rolled very occasionally, and in Space Game, dice are rolled every player turn. Now what I mean by this is that during a game of Space Game, you would decide which planet you were going to, and roll a dice. However, the rolling of the dice every single turn added at least 30 seconds onto each turn, as it wasn't just about the act of rolling, it was picking them up again, and putting them in the right place on the board, and sometimes having to choose which dice to use. So, if you are familiar with Wingspan, then you might know what I'm going to say next. I changed the dice so that instead of rolling them every turn, instead they are rolled once at the start of the round. And that's it. Not only did this make the game feel shorter, and it actually made it around 10 minutes shorter in fact, but it also helped fix our early problem as well. If you watched last week's devlog, you'll know about our target audience of hard fun players. So looking back now, it's obvious why players weren't interacting and making decisions based on resources. It's because the resources were never guaranteed. Why would the player go out of their way to gain resources that they might not actually gain and instead gain resources that they don't want? The game was using output randomness instead of input randomness. The output randomness of committing to a planet to gain particular resources and then subsequently having to roll for those resources, leaving it up to chance, is akin to Dungeons & Dragons or more lightweight, simple games where randomness is at the heart of the game. In Space Game, there is so much planning and strategy that it just feels silly that dice rolls were even an option. Now that there is a dice roll once at the start of the round, before anyone has made a turn, it works so much better. It still gives the luxury of variance from round to round, and I can still have unique dice for each planet, which makes sense contextually and allows me to control the flow of the game. But every player knows where they stand with every planet, which is so vital to this game. Now, on the flip side, there are a couple of fun moments that I miss with the absence of these dice rolls every turn. There were always cool moments where a player really needed a teleport, for example, and if the dice rolled perfectly, they would get it, and it could lead them to winning the game. There were cheers and boos in these moments. It really made the table feel alive. So, with that in mind, I am considering adding a 5th crew card into the game called maybe an influencer or a gambler. And what this crew card would do is that when you landed on a planet, before gaining those resources which are already there, you can instead choose to re-roll them. Now this would be cool because it would bring back those moments that I stated before, but it would also throw spanners into the works of other players in interesting ways, as it would alter their plans and change how they're going to go through the board, because not only have you changed your resources for yourself, you've changed them for everyone else as well. Anyway, that's it from me for now. This devlog was another one of those recounts of months of work. As I was working on the crew cards, which I spent the last 2 videos talking about, I managed to also fix a bunch of other issues with the game, and I'm almost playing catch up with documenting that. Soon though, we will be back up to speed with development and content will be present day, and that'll be really cool because I could get up to date feedback on, say, the 5th crew card for example. Now thank you for watching, and I shall hopefully see you in the next one. Goodbye.